remote boot camp with 150 online at the time, so that was quite an achievement. We're working on eShape and Fire, and of course further SEBS cases. We're also finishing our industry survey. That will be published by the summer, and we're also preparing for a short survey into how the COVID crisis is affecting our members. We've written to Commissioner Breton and Joseph Ashbacker concerning concerns of the sector. So that's a little bit about what we're doing. Maybe Natasha, you would like just to talk about the rules of the webinar, just to remind everybody.
Yes, of course. I'm trying to. Yes. So can you see my screen? Yes. So I would also like to welcome you all. As you can see here, you're already doing it. You should be muted. Also, you're not using your camera, so thank you for that. As Jeff said at the beginning, if you have any question, please write it here in the chat. I'm replying to all the current messages. When you take the floor, please introduce yourself, because I don't assume that people know you by default. I have started recording the webinar just for your information, because we're planning later on to put all the material online. And because your opinion matters a lot to us, and this is the first EOcafe, and we would like to do this in the future. We would like to have your feedback. So as you can see here, we're using Mentimeter. At the end of the webinar, I will appreciate if you can all go to the Mentimeter, use this code, the 109414, and answer like 5 questions. And I guess you'll have a cup of coffee in your hand. So just enjoy the first EOcafe. And thanks once more for joining us.
Thanks. Thanks, Natasha. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to our guests. I'm really pleased to be joined by 3 guests today, experts from the Commission, known to most of you, I imagine. So we have Mauro Facchini, Astrid Koch, and Jean Dussart, who will talk a little bit about what's going on in their areas at this time, as much as they can. We know it's very uncertain. So let's see. So firstly, I'd like to invite Mauro. Mauro's head of unit at the in DG Defense Industry and Space, and of course is responsible for the unit of Earth observation. Many of you will know Mauro for his leadership in Copernicus. So Mauro, can I give you the floor?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hear you loud and clear, Mauro. Hello, Mauro?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello.
We hear
Okay,
you
so
now.
I have to try without headphones. This is better. So I hope that you can hear me in this case. Yeah. So I thank you very much for inviting me to this event, and this with pleasure. It's also a good test for us. I think we start to be used to this kind of meetings. It's a pity that we cannot see face to face with different people, because this is also the advantage of. But we appreciate the fact that you organize this kind of event. I hope that everyone is safe at home, most probably, and hope that this will not last much longer. It will depend from one country to the other. The Commission is already looking to some plans for recovery, but also for restarting activities. It's clear that this will be different from one country to the other. Let's see what's going on. The Commission itself, at least in Brussels, we have been closed since the 18th of March, and following Belgian rules will not for sure go back to work before the 3rd of May. We don't know yet what will happen after that, but there are some sites of the Commission, in particular the JRC, that have been closed since earlier. I think at least 1 or 2 weeks before we closed Brussels. and so we will see. I wanted actually to present you three aspects. The first one, where we stand with a space program. The second one about the budget, so the MFF, and the third one is about what's happening for Copernicus and the COVID crisis. So first part, the space program. As most of you know, the regulation on the space program was adopted by the Commission, and was presented and was discussed with the previous European Parliament and with the Council. So the text, the general approach is available, but still some elements in brackets, in particular linked to the budget and to international cooperation. And this was most linked to the Brexit issue. So these two elements are still blocked in a way, because we have to see how these elements will be tackled. The Brexit, how it will evolve, in particular the post December 2020, so it will happen in 2021. And concerning the budget, we have to look into the MFF that seemed, where initially we thought that the only disturbing element could have been the position of member states saying we need more on one budget, more than another one, we want to reduce the ceiling. And now there is another variable, and it's the COVID crisis, because we have to see if there will be new proposal in order to redirect some energies in, for example, in economic recovery as an exit strategy and so on. So we don't have news on that. We are looking with quite interest with what's happening. And again, when we'll know something, most probably all of you will also know, but we will also try to keep you informed as much as possible. So the space program, despite the fact it's not finally adopted, we are already starting to anticipate things, and so to negotiate some delegation agreements with entrusted entities, just to be ready when the MFF will be adopted and when the space program will be finally signed, to be ready with something. It's clear that the delegation agreements we are discussing in a very draft format and preliminary format for the time being might have to be reviewed when all the elements will be known. But again, we cannot just wait for the final decisions to be taken, because negotiating delegation agreements and everything takes between 6 months and 1 year, and so we cannot afford being in a situation of a gap, taking into account that it's not like at the beginning of the last MFF, where we didn't have a fully operational program. This time we have a fully operational program, and we cannot afford creating gaps in operational production of information. And this is important, I would say, for final users, but also for industry, because I think a continuation for those providing data has to be ensured, but also all the downstream market has to continue to receive all the data that are generated by the program itself. Now, what's happening with Copernicus and the current situation? So the work is continuing. There is no operational disruption in what we are doing, neither on the space part nor in the services part. It's clear that some of the activities have some difficulty or might have some delay due to the fact that most of colleagues are working from home, and there are activities that from home can continue as in the office, but other that cannot continue as in the office. And this is in particular for the construction of satellites and all these elements. So there might be some delays for the time being. It's not so dramatic, but it's not excluded, and maybe dates for launch of C and D units might be delayed a little bit, or other aspects. Therefore, I mean, we have been closed now for 1 or 2 months, so it's quite difficult to understand what will be the final impact. If we restart soon, I think that the impact will be quite limited. If we don't, I think the impact has to be assessed, because let's be frank, the more the situation is continuing, the more there will be a risk. It's a risk also for the companies. With that, I'm not saying that everything has to be reopened and restarting as nothing is happening, because I think the health of people is also a very important aspect. So there are, I think, people that are really in place to take this kind of decisions. From our side, we'll simply do what we will be asked to do. So there will be some experience delay. We know that there are some difficulties from industry, in particular because despite the fact that activities are delayed and contracts might take some more time, some companies are really needing some cash flow in order to continue the activity. We already received this kind of information. We know that ESA is also trying to change a little bit their rules in this respect to anticipate from loading in the contracts. We are trying to see also from the Commission side in our contracts how we can deal with that. If it's possible to have some advance that allows for a continued cash flow and in support of companies. This is not just linked to the domain of space or defense, but this is a general issue. So we have to see how this will be conducted in general terms. And then Copernicus, in support of what's happening, actually the service has been stimulated so the program has been stimulated in different aspects in order to see what can be done. Maybe some of you have already seen that there have been activations in order to check what was happening at the borders between member states at the beginning of the crisis, because member states were imposing strict controls, and these were causing traffic jams with, as a consequence, difficult situation for people in the cars in these queues, but in particular for the transfer of material, and particular medical material, from one country to the other. So the pictures that were given in that case were just to support with, so we knew about the issue, but actually showing sometimes as a different impact. And this was also used by President von der Leyen during one of her speeches to show the impact of the situation. And yeah, an advantage of the satellite image was that it was possible to discriminate in a better way between lorries and cars, and to calculate the number of lorries in the queues and these sort of things. We were in close contact with DG Home and DG Move in that case, were those really running this political issue, and we try to provide some information on different borders. At this moment in time, the activation is on hold because the situation is not so dramatic. It's not closed it's not closed because we have to see if the situation will escalate again. It's not the case yet, but we'll see. Other activation we received have been, for example, from civil protections, in particular in some parts of North Italy, where they wanted to check areas where some camps have been established outside of hospitals, or just to check if some recreation areas were really empty or people were not following the rules. So this has been generated by the emergency service and provided to this Italian civil protection. You have probably seen as well the possible impact of the lockdown on the quality of the air. So some nitrogen dioxide maps showing decrease first in China, and then in north of Italy, and then in all the big cities and big industrial areas in Europe. All this information is quite sticky, but has to be treated quite carefully, because in some cases this kind of information was provided even too quickly without taking into account that there are also some meteorological aspects that we have to consider. In the end, I think ECMWF did a quite deep analysis, and the effect is there, but in order to analyze this decrease, you should not stop at the first level, but really go deeper into analyzing that. Another aspect that we're looking is the potential correlation between the spread of the virus and the environmental and meteorological conditions. There are some studies showing that there might be a correlation between the spread and the temperature, humidity, UV radiation, and so on. And in this respect, with the Atmosphere and Climate Change Service, we are starting to provide So maps that are not saying that this is the true, but they are just providing maps to epidemiologists in order for their studies, in order to check if this correlation is existing. We are in contact with European Center of Disease of the European Commission in Sweden, in order to check what are the real needs for scientists in order to support their studies. Last but not least, we are also in contact with ESA in order to see what kind of other maps information can be provided. So we are looking at different areas like factories, touristic areas, recreation areas, in order to see what has been the difference before and after the crisis, and to see what could be the potential economical impact of that. Also in agriculture, this is done. It's an analysis that is done, and we are planning to have a follow-up of that, really to show how this is happening. An example that probably you have already seen.
Okay, bye-bye.
Probably you have already seen images of Venice, comparing a situation before and after the lockdown, and you see that in one case you see the boat, in the other you don't see that. And by extrapolating that, you can already estimate the number of tourists or tourists that are not going to Venice anymore, and what is the financial impact of all that. So sometimes looking at these pictures, if we look to them in an intelligent way, we can extrapolate also some information that are quite interesting also from the economic point of view. There will be soon, I think, also a web page in DEFIS where it will be kind of warehouse of all data warehouse of all these aspects that are done in support of the COVID crisis. I don't know if Astrid will speak about that, because she's coming from the unit that is dealing with the communication. I will stop it here because I think I already took too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro. Thank you very much. I think there's a page already up and running, but if Astrid will maybe want to mention that. So Astrid, let me pass over to you. Astrid is also in DG DEFIS, senior expert, responsible for international relations, and we've been working very closely with Astrid in terms of the internationalization effort, and we're hoping that we can restart that work for too long. Astrid.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, but I have an echo and I don't know how to solve this.
Oh, so, it's fine.
It's better?
It's
great.
Fine.
So
yeah.
Super. So I'm not only working to get closely together with the colleagues at EARTH, but also with Mauro and with all the other colleagues, because we're really trying to work on business continuity, and Copernicus is an operational program. So we are really making sure that the services continue, the data provision continues, the cooperation and collaboration with our stakeholders continue. It's important. As you know that we are all working from, most of the people working from home. Of course, there are some critical staff in the office, which are very few. These critical staff usually water plants and make sure that signatures are done on documents. But other than that, everybody's at home. I hope everybody is okay. It's sometimes stressful, sometimes not so stressful, but I think the good news is we learn new things, like working with these virtual tools, doing meetings and connecting without going anywhere. So that's good. So well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the international part, because that's what we do, and also the communication side. Well, maybe also what we try to do for industry, because I try to get in contact with our policy folks and say, look, what is in the pipeline. Everything is in fluid at the moment. So what I may say now, maybe not, we need to see. So, but what Mauro said, COVID is important also for the international framework. So I am spending my days now on the telephone with headset on, talking to people around the world and telling them how Copernicus helped them talking to people working on epidemiology, working with NOAA, for example, on air quality with my colleagues from the Copernicus service. I have had more than one, I'm now 3, telephone conferences with the GEO community of practice for health, where a lot of people come in and see how can we use Earth observation data for supporting this pandemic. There's a lot of interest in using Earth observation data also to look at the economic impacts, looking at social economic impact, combining them into models to get wiser. So that's one thing I'm doing. What is currently not really progressing so much is the arrangements, not because they're not ready yet, but I think it's the data flow, the procedure. So I'm here at home, the documents in the pipeline are in the office. So but I think as soon as we get back to normal, that will resume. That said, I'm in close contact with lots of people around the world, and that continues. Getting together is usually an important means to exchange ideas to move things forward. So I just wanted to go now to the communications part. There is now a page up and running on the space response to a COVID, which you can see on the web. Well, you might say, well, what is happening to all the events in the pipeline? Well, we are currently reconsidering all events. A lot of events are cancelled or postponed, and we are currently looking at ways to do that in a virtual format. We've been very successful in joining the big Committee on Earth Observation Satellites conference, which is supposed to be in Hobart in Australia, but there were over 100 participants, and based thanks to the discipline of the people, it was a very successful event. So we might turn some of our events to the virtual format. For example, we have planned an industry workshop on CO2 monitoring, and that was, I think, scheduled for late June. We're currently thinking of making this a virtual one, but nothing decided yet. And we now need to see how the situation is improving or not. So if it's not really improving, our communications colleagues will adapt or adopt this same approach for bigger events at the later part of this year. They will do that, of course, with the partners and with the contractors working on this to see how they can do this in a way that it's technically feasible and applicable or to do bigger formats. And well, but what is sad is, personally, I enjoy meeting the people in person and having coffee as we do now, but it's always better and bigger and better to do this in person. So what we try to do is, and if there is a chance to have a really in-person meeting, also do an in-person meeting, but that remains to be seen. Another thing is, yeah. George?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were just finishing, Astrid. Sorry.
No, I can't. I just say that I've talked to our policy colleagues, and they said, look, what can we say on support for industry? And they said, look, what Mauro just said, we try to make sure that the cash flow flows, and not only for the big players, but also for the small and medium-sized companies, also for the researchers, for Horizon 2020 participants, and the colleagues from the Cassini initiative said, look, we might do specific things to get things moving. So, but that is at the moment all I can say about that one, but now I close. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Astrid. And I think cash and finance are the key topics. I mean, we see difficulties ahead as the market changes, but it's too early to say exactly how. You mentioned talking with Geo several times, so that gives us a nice introduction into the next speaker. Jean Dussart, who is from DG Research and Innovation, in charge of climate and planetary boundaries in the environmental observations sector. Jean is currently locked down in Lombardy, I believe. So we're pleased to welcome him from distance and to talk, I think, about EuroGEO and GEO in general. Jean, the floor is yours. Jean? I know Jean was having some problems with the connections when we've tested earlier. I hope that he's still with us. Hello, Jean.
Like this, do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, then I continue. I was just thanking you for the opportunity to present you a bit where we stand in DG Research and Innovation. So of course we are basically in the same situation, of course, of all the rest of the Commission and our colleagues of DEFIS. Look at home, I have to say that I'm quite lucky because I managed to reach my family that is still living in northern Italy, yes, in Lombardy, close to Ispra. And 3 weeks ago, I managed to find one of those last flights that were still running between Brussels and Italy. And so I'm very pleased to be back and to be with my family. And we try to adjust to share the same DSL line between all the members of the family, which is not always easy, but we try to manage to the best. So the presentation I would like to deliver now, I would like first to go a bit through where we stand with the Horizon program, because it's basically our main tool to support the Earth observation industry for the time being. So then I would like to say a few words about the EuroGEO initiative and how we adjust as well to the COVID situation and what are the next milestones, the next steps. And then I would like to finish in bringing back our relations with the group on Earth observation, GEO, that was already mentioned by Astrid in her speech. So let's start with Horizon 2020. You might, some of you might have seen a number of calls that were launched last year on the development of commercial activities and service through the use of GEOS and Copernicus data. For the moment, the first one, the 5 project, and Earth is part of it, and probably some of you are part of this coordination and support action that's just been kicked off in December, and I was happy to hear that despite the difficulties of the moment, you managed to run it as smoothly as possible. Then there are a number of projects that are being prepared, so it's about 5 projects, and we hope that the grant agreement will be able to be signed early next month. Maybe we can see now, next slide, please. Thank you. About the calls that we got this year, a number of calls were issued just before the crisis in February. No, sorry, they were launched in November, but with a deadline in February on climate application to support adaptation and mitigation, supporting the implementation of GEOs in the Arctic, and the support to the mountain research strategy. We are still in the bidding phase, so the second stage is expected to be closed the 3rd of September. Then we hope as well, even if again the date might be a shift, to able to close an important prize that we launched already a few years ago on early warning for epidemics. It's on vector-borne disease, so it's indirectly related to the COVID, but I think it's certainly something that is interesting to prevent disease outbreak and reduce the impact they should occur. It's a quite substantial price because it represents 5 million euros. We hope that by later this year, probably right after the summer, we will be able to launch another Horizon 2020 call on in support to the European Green Deal. The total budget is around 1 billion euro. Of course, with the COVID situation, we still don't know how it will be, if there will be some shift of priorities in the content, but we will certainly keep you posted once we have some clarification on that. Next slide, please. Horizon, as you know, and while we are still working very hardly on the Horizon 2020, we are still, despite the situation, to prepare the field for what is coming next. That means essentially Horizon Europe was reached end of last year, a partial agreement between the Council, the Commission, and the Parliament. And there were a number of clusters where Earth observation and environmental observation are clearly inserted in the cluster 6 on food, the economy, natural resource, agriculture, and environment. This is the cluster we are in DG Research and Innovation. We are deeply involved. In particular, there is already an area of intervention on environmental observation. But our colleagues from DEFIS are leading the cluster 4 activities, where there will be an area of intervention on space that includes Earth observation. In parallel, we are working on the first element of the work on the first Horizon Europe work program that will cover 2021 and 2022. Still lots of work and uncertainties, and we cannot yet really so much information because we don't have a full control of the calendar of development of all those elements, but we hope to be ready on time, and pending, of course, the approval of the MFF that Mauro mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. What Europe and the European Commission in particular is doing, it was mentioned by the two previous speakers, the coronavirus response of the Commission. And I think it's very important to remind and invite you as well to look at what is done at the community level, because of course it's important that member states are all acting together and takes initiative to fight this pandemic. But it's always of utmost importance to remember that the Commission and the European Union and its role is very active and trying as well to find options to relieve the economy, to keep investing, supporting research, and you see a number of those initiatives that the Commission has taken recently. Next slide, please. At a much more small level, you might be aware of the EuroGEO initiative that was launched 2 years ago jointly between us and at that time was still DG GROW in Washington. So it's a contribution to the implementation of GEOs in Europe, but it's as well a way and a framework to foster GEOs uptake by users in Europe and make aware the GEOs community of what Europe can offer, like, for example, of course, the Copernicus program. So we see EuroGEO more like an integrator that is able to fold different public observation downstream activities in Europe. You see some of the activities we have been initiating those last 2 years. But again, we have to adjust to the new situation. In the next slide, please. What I would like to mention is that we benefit from a strong support from the GEO community and in particular from the observation industry in Europe and all the partners that are engaged in our various Horizon 2020 projects. And so we have a very successful presence of the commercial sector and of EuroGEO during the last ministerial in November that took place in Australia, in Canberra. But activities are still continuing. Last month, we had our EuroGEO coordination meeting, which was a mix of physical and virtual meetings. So we were already preparing in the direction of having more virtual meetings. For example, later today, I will have a call conference with colleagues from the GEO community to prepare the next GEO symposium that will take place in June. It will be a virtual meeting. Usually it was always a physical meeting taking place in Geneva, where we try to prepare the work program of GEO for the coming 2-3 years. Then we will still have activities around EuroGEO in June because, as you can imagine, we will not be able to organize our next EuroGEO workshop as a physical meeting. It was planned to take place in Paris, and it will be probably postponed to January, February, still in Paris. In November, we will see as well, hopefully, there will be the next GEO week. It will be a plenary meeting. It's still scheduled to take place in Port Elizabeth in South Africa. Hopefully, it will be maintained, but it will, of course, depend how the situation and how the outbreak evolves, in particular in Africa. And of course, we have a number of concerns on how the situation can develop. But we think it's a unique opportunity again for the European industry to be seen and to liaise and find business opportunities. Next slide, please. In Canberra last year was approved an important declaration that was supported by ministers and representatives from the GEO community. That means more than 100 countries and more than 100 participating organizations. I've highlighted two elements that I think are quite important for the community around EASC. The one is on the growing engagement of the commercial sector in the GEO community, and as well the acknowledgement that regional GEO and regional initiatives such as EuroGEO are essential components and they should form an entire part of the GEO structures. Next slide. And I think that will be my last slide. I was mentioning this increase of the engagement of the commercial sector in GEO, and EASC together with other industrial partners of Europe was, as I mentioned, very active in Canberra. There was a dedicated industry track to give opportunities for the European industry to meet the partners from other continents and build business relationship. something new, and that we are very supportive, is the creation of a new category of GEO members, which is the associate category. It enables commercial, non-governmental, and all those organizations to join the GEO community as official GEO collaborators. We expect, of course, that they can engage under various fronts, and that includes participation in and sponsorship of GEO events, contribution to the GEO work program, and it's already the case via a number of Horizon 2020 projects that are active components and active contributors to the GEO work program. But what we would like to see more is more effective and strong contribution of the observation industry to offer cloud service, climate service, the savoir-faire, the knowledge, and the expertise, and promote it better. And I think that it could be a win-win solution. And so we would not leave all the floor to the big US companies that, as you probably know, are very active and are making substantial efforts to play an active role in GEO. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean. Really appreciate that, and you can certainly count on us at ERST to be trying to increase the engagement of the commercial sector with the GEO community, which I think is a good opportunity. There are a few questions coming through. The first one was from Remco. Remco, do you want to ask further about the website?
Sure, yes. It was a very simple question to Astrid, because in her short presentation, she mentioned about a website about Copernicus and CoVid, and this is a topic that is going round in the space and Earth observation circles quite a bit. So some information as input for other webinars would be good. So if there's a link that can be shared, that'd be much appreciated.
So I'm sure Astrid will share the link. I think we have the link, so we can certainly.
Yes, please share
that.
the link. If you don't find the link, contact me and I'll find you the link. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Stefan just shared it on the chat. Thank you, Stefan.
Okay. Then Estella was asking a question about links into the environment and ocean field, and particularly for SMEs. Estella, do you want to clarify your question?
Okay, I can try to answer if we don't have a clarification. Of course, the calls I mentioned on for 2020 work program of Horizon 2020 are only the ones that are directly referring to Earth observation or to GEOS. But the work program 2020, you can imagine it's much broader than that.
Yeah, it's
and
big.
it covers certainly activities and goals that are specific to oceans, fisheries. I don't know them by heart, but I would be pleased to provide you with the correct reference.
Okay, is it possible that by email we can share and ask that directly with you, or could you? I don't know, if I could not see everything on that regard on the presentation, or you suggest any link where I can find it?
Oh, that you could go directly on the website of Horizon 2020, the participant portal, and you can. There are filters where you can select what are the calls that are still open, specifically on the societal challenge 5 that covers most of your areas of interest.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you.
I imagine that we'll have opportunities to exchange on aspects of the work program in due course, and we'll certainly try to enable that. Jeff Smith, you've got a long question. I don't know whether, do you want to put it? I'm not sure if Mauro is still with us. I think I think I saw him. He left.
I'm still there.
Okay, thank you, Mauro.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's less of a question, maybe more of a sort of point of information, but we know that international collaboration is pretty crucial within the Copernicus program. And one of the pillars of that is going to be the use of standards, particularly across the services. And one of the aspects I'm involved with through my work with the EAGLE Group and the European Environment Agency is on land cover standards. And I was just wanting to raise the issue that at the moment the ISO International Standards Organization is extending and revising its land classification standard. And it would be really useful if we could have a sort of strong support or engagement from the European Commission and the Copernicus program within that standards revision, because I think it could have quite significant impacts for the monitoring and evaluation of EU policies. The work we've done on the EAGLE Group in the past is being folded into that, but I think some political support and political engagement will be quite useful, and to sort of line that up over the next year to 2 years as those revisions are taking place. So it's more of a point of information really to Mauro, and we can discuss this offline in more detail, but obviously Earth observation service providers would also be interested in this this issue of developing standards. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Do you want to comment, Mauro?
No, I think it's quite it's an interesting point. We've raised that several times. In particular, if we look into environmental standards, this is something that has to be considered. And for the time being, we are following a little bit what each environment is asking us, also through the EEA, so through their legislation. We have to see if some other standards could be integrated into that. It's an interesting reflection.
Okay, great. Is there are there any other questions? We need to close fairly soon, but if there's one more question, I'm happy to take it. If not, I was just wondering, Mauro, if there's anything further you can say about the changes to the delegation agreements. You mentioned that there may be some changes. I guess budget is one issue, but are there other factors driving changes to delegation agreements?
Let's say, I would say most probably the most affected might be the one with ESA, but in particular as the content, because there will be a single financial framework partnership agreement that will be a kind of chapeau for everything, that will include all interaction with ESA, and then there will be some specific ones related to the different components of the program. So there will be a specific part on Galileo, a specific part on Copernicus, and so on. And we don't have to underestimate the new role of the GSA, even though for Copernicus will be limited, but it will be more important than in the past, because in the end, the GSA might have a role that could be also interesting for you, because it will be about the business development and so on. So they will cooperate with us in that respect. They will have also some role in communication and other aspects. And I would not say that they will be the only ones doing that. So it will be done in coordination with the Commission and with the entrusted entities. But in any case, they will have a role that they didn't have in the past. For the services, I think we would like to follow a similar path. And the good thing is that we are not starting from scratch. We have already something that existing in the past. We have to ensure continuation and, if possible, starting from there to give some evolution. The question mark is how much.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. Firstly, I see Monica's sharing a link on the chat about a video and some information around the COVID situation, talking about something which is ready for today at 6 o'clock, 1800. But before we finish, I really should just give the floor to our chairman, who's asking a question to Jean about SMEs and associates in GEO. Chetan?
Oh, thank you very much, Jeff. Yes, hello everyone. It's Chetan Pradhan here from EarthEye in the UK and the chairman of the board of ERSC. Thank you all for your very interesting presentations, very helpful, very useful. I did have a question for Jean on GEO, and it's very welcome, Jean, that GEO is opening up more to the private sector and encouraging more associates. But looking through the list online, there's very few associates so far, and mostly the bigger companies. I was interested if you had a view how smaller companies could get more involved in GEO as associates. Thank you.
Well, there are no restriction to small companies to apply and to become associates. It's a relatively straightforward process. Of course, there is a sort of evaluation to ensure that somehow it's not only by pure interest, that there will be a contribution of the companies to the success and to the activities of the GEO community. It's true that it's a relatively new tool, and so for the moment there are only a limited number of companies, but there are no restriction or obligation to reach a certain critical mass to be a member, to be recognized as associate.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Thank you, Chetan. I'm going to close the webinar now, close the cafe. Thank you all very much for your attendance. Thanks for Natasha to help in setting this up. Please remember, if you can, to respond on the Mentimeter. It will take you less than a minute, and it will just help us guide future meetings. Our intention is to hold another EOcafe probably in around 2 weeks' time. We're discussing the content for that, so please watch for announcements, and if you have views, you can express them through Mentimeter. So a final message, thank you to our three speakers. We really appreciate your time this afternoon. Everybody, please take care. Virtual meetings are good, and we're no doubt going to have more virtual meetings in the future. But I'm sure, like most of you, I look forward to the time when we can meet together and enjoy together either a beer, a wine, or even a real cup of coffee. So everyone take care and talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye from Portugal.
And thank you.
Bye all.
We have a lot of Europe covered here.
Bye from Brussels.
I see Portugal and Greece leaving.
Miss you.
UK is left already.
I can't believe it.
If someone wants to stay, we're here and we can continue having an EOcafe. ERSC is here.
Yeah.
I invite the
A little wash up.
here in Portugal. Well, I try to leave.
No, stay.
We can take direct feedback as well without going through Mentimeter, but we would appreciate Mentimeter. Yeah, we would very much appreciate your ideas.
I will say goodbye
views.
now.
Bye.
Yeah.
Then.
Thanks, Astrid. Bye. Just see all the names as people are leaving.
Yes, it's beautiful.
I don't know if we have a list somewhere of everyone who joined. The names were coming and going at one point. So that was an experience.
Yes, so we can officially close this meeting. Goodbye, all.
Yeah. Jean, thank you.